Some women don't leave footprints, they leave echoes. Not in the form of memories, but in the way the silence grows louder after they've gone. You don't just remember her face. You feel the absence of your own reflection in her gaze. And that's the truth no one prepares a man for. That the hardest part isn't losing her. It's losing the version of himself he only knew in her presence. He doesn't miss her body. He misses who he was around her. The way he slowed down, the way his breath fell into rhythm with something older, something sacred, the way his chaos softened without effort, not because she demanded peace, but because she was peace. And now she's gone. She didn't leave a hole, she left a mirror, and that's far more dangerous, because a hole can be filled. But a mirror forces you to look. This is why he can't stop thinking about her. Not because she was perfect, not because the connection was flawless, but because something inside her called out something buried inside him. And now that it's been touched, it won't sleep again. Carl Jung would call it the anima, the inner feminine in a man's psyche. Not a woman, but the feeling of woman, the embodiment of grace, chaos, seduction, silence, and the sacred unknown. When he met her, he didn't just fall for her. He collided with a piece of himself he'd forgotten how to access. And in that collision, he remembered, not facts, but feelings. How it feels to be tender without apology. How it feels to listen without planning. How it feels to stop performing and just be. Alan Watts once said, "You are a function of what the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing." She made him feel like a wave again, not separate, not alone, part of something flowing. But now that she's gone, he's back in his head, back in the roles, back in the proving. And that's why she haunts him. Not because she was the one, but because she was the reminder. The reminder of the man he could be if he stopped clinging to control, if he allowed softness to speak, if he trusted presence more than power. But she's not here anymore. She doesn't text, she doesn't check in, she doesn't orbit. She has returned to herself, and he is left with the ache. Not just for her, but for the silence inside him that still holds her shape. And in that silence, a deeper question rises. Was it ever her he wanted, or was it the permission she gave him to feel without defense, to want without shame, to love without needing to win? This is the wound that lingers, the ache not of losing her, but of meeting the man he could be, and not knowing how to stay there without her light. So he keeps thinking, replaying, reimagining, not because he can't move on, but because he hasn't yet learned how to be that version of himself without needing her reflection to prove he exists. And until he does, her absence will not be quiet. It will speak to him like a riddle, not to punish, but to awaken. He moves through his days as if nothing has changed, smiles when he should, works when required, laughs in moments that demand it. But beneath the routine, beneath the performance, there's a presence that lingers, hers. Not the woman herself, but what she stirred in him, what she uncovered, what she invited to the surface before vanishing like smoke. It wasn't the words she said. It wasn't the stories they shared. It was the feeling that haunted him, the feeling of being seen without needing to be spectacular. She asked for no mask. She needed no charm. She didn't fall for his achievements or his crafted confidence. She fell silent in his silence and waited for his truth to arrive. And now he feels empty, not because she took something, but because she showed him something he doesn't know how to access alone. This is where the grief sharpens, not in what was lost, but in what was briefly found. A rare kind of intimacy that doesn't demand performance. A rare kind of woman who doesn't confuse chaos with passion or possession with love. Alan Watts said, "The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet, everybody rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves." She didn't want him to achieve. She didn't want him to perform. She wanted him to be, and for a moment he was. But the moment passed, and now he chases that feeling as if it lives in her body, as if he could reclaim himself by finding her again. But the truth is sharper. She wasn't the source. She was the catalyst. She didn't create the man he became in her presence. She simply stopped distracting him from himself. And now, in her absence, he is left with the hardest task of all, to become that man on his own. Not for her, not to win her back, but because once you've felt yourself fully alive, you cannot return to numbness without knowing you've abandoned something sacred. He thinks of her not because she was perfect, but because she made him feel whole. And now that she's gone, he realizes it was never her completeness that held him. It was his own mirrored in her eyes. But mirrors leave no warmth. They only reflect what is already present. And so the ache returns, not to punish, but to ask, can you remember who you were without needing someone else to prove it? Can you stand in the same softness she once awakened and hold it yourself? This is the work. This is the journey, not to get her back, but to get you back. Because the version of yourself who breathed more deeply, loved more gently, and listened with reverence, that version is not lost. He's waiting, not in her arms, but in your own. She was not a storm. She was the stillness before it, the quiet breath of air that comes when something inside you is about to change forever. And change it did, but not in the ways he imagined. She didn't stay long enough to rewrite his story. She stayed just long enough to reveal that the story he'd been living was never really his. He had been chasing safety, approval, status, success, wearing armor that looked like strength but weighed like fear, until she walked in, with no sword, no promises, just presence. She didn't need to fight for his attention. She simply existed in truth, and that truth disrupted everything. It wasn't her beauty that undid him. It was her silence, her refusal to be impressed, her ability to see him without needing to fix or flatter. He remembers the way she looked at him, not with hunger, but with depth, not with desire, but with recognition. She didn't want to consume him. She wanted to witness him. And that, for a man unaccustomed to being seen beyond his image, felt terrifyingly intimate. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." She didn't terrify him. His own reflection in her presence did, because it was no longer filtered through ego, no longer curated for applause. In her gaze, he wasn't the provider, the performer, the protector. He was simply himself. And for the first time, he wondered if that could be enough. That question has never left him. Even now, in the quiet hours of the night when her name no longer tastes like longing but like a hymn, he feels the tension between who he pretended to be and who she showed him he could become. This is why her memory remains. Not because he wants her back, but because he doesn't want to forget what her presence awoke. She was never the destination. She was the turning point, a compass needle pulling him inward toward a deeper man he had spent years avoiding. And now that he's met that man, he can't unmeet him. Alan Watts said, "You don't look out there for God, something in the sky. You look in you." She made him look in. And now, no matter where he goes, who he meets, or how deeply he tries to bury the ache, he carries her essence as a reminder, not of love lost, but of truth remembered. Because that's what she was, a door, not to her, but to the life he was meant to live before the world told him who to be. There is a grief that feels like devotion, a quiet kind of mourning, not for the woman herself, but for the moment she created. The moment he stopped reaching for control and finally let go. The moment his breath slowed and his soul dared to rise without apology. The moment her presence reminded him of the kind of man he could be if he stopped running from stillness. He doesn't cry for her. He aches for the experience she embodied. The way her silence didn't ask for anything, but revealed everything. She never tried to save him. She never begged to be understood. She simply stood like a truth he had never let himself believe. That there is strength in surrender, power in receptivity, divinity in softness. And now her absence teaches him more than her words ever could. Because the echo of the feminine doesn't disappear when the woman leaves. It deepens. It carves a hollow space where the soul can echo. And in that space he begins to feel again. Not the sharp edge of desire, but the slow burn of remembrance. He remembers the man who didn't need to impress, who didn't need to win, who didn't armor himself in logic and achievement just to feel worthy of existing. That man is still within him, but now he must choose him without her as a mirror. This is the crux of it all. She awakened what was always his. But awakening is not the same as embodiment. To embody that depth, he must now hold space for himself. He must become the witness. He must become the presence. He must become what she once reflected. This is what Carl Jung called individuation. Not the pursuit of another, but the full integration of one's own inner opposites. The masculine and the feminine, the strength and the sensitivity, the power and the poetry. And in this integration, the ache shifts. It no longer feels like hunger. It feels like homecoming. He no longer longs for her to return, because the part of her that mattered never really left. She is there in the way he now pauses before speaking, in the way he listens to his own body instead of silencing it, in the way he walks into rooms without needing to dominate them to feel seen. She is there, not as a ghost, but as a guide, a feminine fingerprint on his soul that says, this is who you are when you stop pretending. Alan Watts once said, "To have faith is to trust yourself to the water. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you will sink and drown. Instead, you relax and float." She taught him to float, not on her, but in his own depth. And now he doesn't need her to come back, because she never truly left. What he misses was never her body. It was his own being, fully felt, fully alive, fully surrendered, and that he can choose again with every breath. The greatest illusion is thinking it was ever about her, her smile, her voice, her presence in the room, her absence from his life. But slowly he begins to see it. The truth is subtler than desire, deeper than grief. He didn't want her. He wanted to remain the man he became when she looked at him, without needing her to keep looking. And that's the paradox of presence. Once touched by that depth, he can never again be satisfied with shallow. He may try, he may distract himself, he may entertain other faces, other laughs, other connections, but nothing strikes that same chord. Because it was never about the woman, it was about the frequency of wholeness, of stillness, of being without performance, of breathing without strategy, of loving without needing. She was the first to tune him to that note, but the note itself was his. Now he must become the instrument that plays it. No longer reactive, no longer seeking, just being deeply, fully, without justification. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Her leaving was not fate. It was an invitation, a descent, a doorway into the unconscious, where his fears live, where his ego resists, where his true self has been waiting. And now he walks through that door alone. Not lonely, just alone. Because to become whole, he must let go of the need to be completed. He must face the mirror without her reflection. And in doing so, he will finally understand. The reason he couldn't stop thinking about her was because he wasn't ready to hold what she handed him. Not her affection, but his own essence, unfiltered, unguarded, undistracted. That is what haunted him. Not the loss, but the memory of his own aliveness. Now he begins to live from that place. Not every moment, not perfectly, but more often, with more breath, with more reverence, with less fear. And one day, without even noticing, he'll stop thinking about her altogether. Not because he forgot, but because he remembered. He remembered who he is without needing her gaze to believe it. She no longer waits to be seen. She sees herself, and that changes everything.